Who is the Hobgoblin? A quick Google search will tell you that the man under the hood is Roderick Kingsley. That's true, but what if I told you that hasn't always been the case? The history of the Hobgoblin's secret identity is tumultuous, to say the least. However, before I get too ahead of myself, let's take a step back and talk about the Hobgoblin's origins. The Green Goblin's death all the way back in the landmark Death of Gwen Stacy storyline left a vacuum in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. For reference, Green Goblin was killed in the Amazing Spider-Man number 122. For years, writers tried to fill the hole Norman Osborn left. The Green Goblin's two successors were Harry Osborn and Bart Hamilton. Neither were quite able to fill the Goblin's pointy boobs. Enter Roger Stern. Roger Stern began writing for Spider-Man with Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 43. Eventually, Stern would leave this book for the mainline Amazing title, starting with issue number 224. Roger Stern is one of the most well-regarded Spider-Man writers of all time, well known for stories such as Nothing Stops the Juggernaut and The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man. However, his greatest contribution to the Spider-Man mythos would come in the Amazing Spider-Man number 238. Stern decided to have Spider-Man fight the Goblin again, yet didn't want to bring back any of the previous ones. Rather than recycling the Green Goblin, why not make a new Goblin? It only made sense. The previous Green Goblins had lofty expectations to live up to, which is why neither was particularly beloved. After all, how do you match the villain who killed Spider-Man's love interest? So, rather than try to do that, Stern thought it'd be a good idea to make a Goblin that could still fill the role the Green Goblin once did, while also standing on their own. This is what would lead to the creation of the Hobgoblin. Artist John Romita Jr. was tasked with designing this Hobgoblin. I'd say he did a great job. It's a strong design, staying close to the original Green Goblin while not being too derivative. There's just enough similarities to let you know that going off of visuals alone, he and the Green Goblin share some DNA. Yet, at the same time, they're different enough for the Hobgoblin to feel fresh. Hobgoblin's debut is a fairly unremarkable comic for the most part. Good, but nothing groundbreaking. At some point in the issue, a criminal named George escapes Spider-Man's capture and stumbles across one of the Green Goblin's lairs. Now, while reading this comic for the first time, you'd expect that George would become the Hobgoblin. However, Roger Stern throws a curveball and instead has George report to a mysterious person about the lair. Later on, this mysterious man kills George. Why? So that there's nobody else who knows about this aside from him, setting up that whoever this guy is, he's got an identity he desperately wants to protect. The issue ends with him trying the Hobgoblin costume on for the first time. Last thing you see is a truly incredible splash page of the reader's first true look at the Hobgoblin. All as he proudly boasts about his new identity. Talk about a strong first impression. When it came to the Hobgoblin's identity, it was a complete mystery at this point. Even Roger Stern didn't know who the Hobgoblin was when he first came up with the character. It was only when writing the dialogue that he noticed that the voice for the Hobgoblin was similar to another character he had written before. In trying to keep the Hobgoblin's identity secret, Stern was hoping to recapture the mystery surrounding the Green Goblin in the original issues of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Spider-Man run. To say it worked would be an understatement. Theories about who the Hobgoblin were all over the place. People were throwing out names like J. Jonah Jameson, Quentin Beck, Ned Leeds, Roger Kingsley, Harry Osborn, Lance Bannon, and even dear old Aunt May. It was clear this mystery was a success. Not helping matters was that Stern liked to bait fans over it too. For example, the Amazing Spider-Man number 245 loudly claimed at the cover, "Hobgoblin unmasked!" Included was an illustration of Spider-Man holding the Hobgoblin by the scruff of his collar in one hand and mask in the other. Of course, Hobgoblin's face is pointed away from the viewer. Once you know it, this was just bait to get more customers to buy the book. Inside the comic, it's revealed that this Hobgoblin is actually just a stooge that was set up by the real Hobgoblin to test his modified Goblin formula before he took it himself. Said stooge is then killed by the end of the issue. However, even Spider-Man knows that this probably isn't the end for the Hobgoblin. Next time the Hobgoblin's identity would be baited is the Amazing Spider-Man number 251. The cover shows Spider-Man's hand rising out of the water, holding the Hobgoblin's mask. Now, how Spider-Man and the Hobgoblin end up in the water is a whole other story. The important thing is that yes, Spider-Man does manage to claim the Hobgoblin's mask, but it looks like the Hobgoblin himself is long gone. Whether he drowned or escaped is left a mystery. So, once again, readers were left without an answer. More concerning, however, is that this was Roger Stern's last issue on the book. Well, somewhat. This book was co-written by Roger Stern and the man who would follow him up, Tom DeFalco. I'm not sure the exact reason why Stern left the book before even finishing the Hobgoblin story. It's not like he left Marvel as a whole since he went on to write Avengers. Before Stern left, DeFalco asked him who Hobgoblin was. Stern told him, but DeFalco didn't like the answer, if only because it would require something that might feel like a cop-out. With that, Stern gave his blessing to DeFalco to make the Hobgoblin's identity whoever he felt fit the role best. DeFalco determined that Richard Fisk would be the best identity for the Hobgoblin. Now, Roger Stern's original intention with the Hobgoblin says identity would be revealed exactly one issue after how long it took for the Green Goblin to be unmasked. However, Tom DeFalco thought that the mystery is the most compelling thing the character had going for him, so he decided to stretch the mystery out a little bit further. With that, it should come as no surprise that the teases just wouldn't stop. The next one would come in The Amazing Spider-Man number 276. The cover depicts an unmasked Hobgoblin being hauled off by the police as Spider-Man says, "No, it can't be true. I finally managed to unmask the Hobgoblin, but it can't be him." Just to really rub it in your face, there's a little box in the corner that says, "At last! The face beneath the mask!" Now, if you've been paying attention, it's pretty obvious this was a dirty fucking lie. Just in case you thought it wasn't funny the first 2 times, here it is again. You see, Flash Thompson is unmasked the Hobgoblin in this issue, but as it turns out he was framed by the actual Hobgoblin. Why? Because Flash talks shit about the Hobgoblin on television. Gotta love that pettiness. By this point, Hobgoblin's identity had been a mystery for 38 issues, for 3 years in real time. Alrighty, that's stretching things pretty thin. However, if you think this is a mess already, just you wait. Things would get truly complicated when Christopher Priest, then known as Jim Owsley, became the editor for the Spider-Man books. Now, Tom DeFalco and Christopher Priest have an infamously strained relationship. To say that they didn't like each other would be putting it lightly. From this point onward, the behind-the-scenes drama gets really blurry. There are many different accounts from many different perspectives out there. However, I'm going to go with this story since it's what I've heard the most frequently. At one point at a creators conference, Priest kept pestering DeFalco about the Hobgoblin's identity. Growing sick of Priest's demands, DeFalco lied and told him Ned Leeds is the Hobgoblin. If only DeFalco knew what Priest would do next. You see, Christopher Priest wrote a one-shot called Spider-Man vs. Wolverine. In that book, he had Ned Leeds killed off-screen, leaving Spider-Man to find his corpse, which was tied to a chair. He was also gagged and had a slit throat. It was just about the most humiliating way for him to die. Was Ned Leeds killed specifically despite Tom DeFalco over a lie? Hard to say, but it's possible. Either way, DeFalco left The Amazing Spider-Man, or was fired depending on who you ask, and Priest took up writing it. He also wanted Peter David, then writer of Spectacular Spider-Man, to reveal that the Foreigner was the Hobgoblin the whole time. Who the hell is Foreigner? Some assassin jerk, but more importantly, he's the guy who killed Ned Leeds. However, David refused and stood by the Hobgoblin being Ned Leeds, even if, you know, Ned Leeds was dead now. Priest was then also fired, and Peter David took up writing The Amazing Spider-Man. He then wrote a story where it was posthumously revealed that the Hobgoblin was Ned Leeds in The Amazing Spider-Man number 289. A nearly 4-year mystery was wrapped up with that dud. Also, did I say the Foreigner killed him? That's only technically true, as Foreigner actually sent a measly 4 henchmen to dispose of Ned. 4 unpowered goons. That's all it took to take Ned out. Not only that, but Ned being disposed of is written in the most pathetic way possible. These goons manhandle him, break his arm even. He's supposedly stronger than even the Green Goblin, but this is how he dies? Before dying, he even started screaming things like, "Ah! My arm! You broke my arm! This is insane! It's not supposed to happen this way! It's not fair!" And also, "Spider-Man! Help!" So, as if the reveal isn't disappointing enough, they have Ned go out like a bitch. It genuinely feels like this was written to make him out to be as pathetic as humanly possible. This was the great Hobgoblin, people. Imagine being a reader who was following the Hobgoblin saga for nearly 4 years, and this is the resolution you're given. It just sucks. Not to mention, Hobgoblin being Ned Leeds just doesn't make sense for a multitude of reasons. Hobgoblin's first appearance involved him killing Georgie for no reason other than to protect his identity. Right off the bat, he's established to be some cold-blooded killer, which Ned wasn't. Hobbs also able to afford a condo on Long Island to act as his hideout. No way Ned Leeds can afford something like that on a Daily Bugle budget. Yet the disappointment doesn't end there, as a new Hobgoblin quickly takes the place of Leeds. This Hobgoblin is Jason Macendale, and the only thing you need to know about him is that he's a big loser. Seriously, this guy enhanced himself thrice. First with demonic powers, then with some Craven juice, and then with some cybernetic parts. Despite these upgrades, he still never managed to be an actual threat to anybody. It was hard to take this idiot seriously, even from his debut, which featured the Kingpin burning him in a rather savage fashion. "Macendale is dead!" That would be an insignificant loss. A pathetic little man who had beaten by a superior foe runs like a whipped puppy to someone else to get his dirty work done, who then obtains the equipment of his deceased enemy, makes some useless mortifications, and uses this power to dispatch hapless underlings. Whom are you trying to impress? Certainly not me. If the Hobgoblin identity weren't already in the mud after the whole Ned Leeds fiasco, Macendale's stint in the role made it very clear that the Hobgoblin was past his prime. Further nailing the coffin for the Hobgoblin was the original Green Goblin's return in the infamous Clone Saga. It's a tragic end to a character that was once considered the next great contender for Spider-Man's arch enemy. So, you're probably sitting there quite confused. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that the Hobgoblin was Roderick Kingsley, yet I've only mentioned him once during this explanation. That's because the original Hobgoblin story wasn't quite done yet. Many years later, in 1997 to be more precise, Roger Stern returned to helm the 3-issue miniseries Hobgoblin Lives. This story promised to be the true ending to the original Hobgoblin saga, as originally intended by Stern. As it turns out, he was also quite unhappy with the revelation that Hobgoblin was Ned Leeds the whole time. Can you blame him? The miniseries starts with Jason McIndale being arrested. While being hauled off, he publicly reveals that the first Hobgoblin was actually Ned Leeds, which leads to a huge media frenzy. As it turns out though, the first Hobgoblin is still out there. When he hears that McIndale is bringing awareness to the fact that there are actually multiple Hobgoblins to the public at large, he gets worried. This newfound knowledge and interest in the Hobgoblin case could be what leads to everyone finding out who the real Hobgoblin is. What's a guy to do? Hobgoblin decides to just straight up murder McIndale in his jail cell before he starts blabbing even more. Hashtag McIndale didn't commit suicide. Funny story about this actually. Roger Stern realized that having two Hobgoblins running around would be weird. So he's open to any ideas to resolve this, such as McIndale thrashing the original Hobgoblin, or something along those lines. However, Marvel Editorial just straight up told him he might as well kill McIndale. I guess even they knew that this dumbass's career wasn't going anywhere. Throughout the story and previous Hobgoblin appearances, you actually see him and Roger Kingsley interact together in many scenes. It is clear that there is a connection between them. Yet, of course, Kingsley can't be behind Hobgoblin's mask if he and Hobby have been in the same room, right? Well, kinda. The end of the story reveals it is indeed Roderick Kingsley beneath the Hobgoblin's mask. As it turns out, anytime Roderick was seen on the same page with the Hobgoblin, it was actually Roddy's brother, Daniel. This is revealed by Betty Brant removing Roderick's toupee. It's not like this revelation came out of nowhere. In exactly one issue of the original Hobgoblin saga, Roderick does mention having a brother. Daniel also appears throughout Hobgoblin Lives, so it only mostly comes out of nowhere. I should clarify, they aren't twins either. They just resemble each other enough that Daniel can pass as Roderick with a wig. So, who is Roderick Kingsley? Roderick Kingsley is a character that was introduced in Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 43 in June 1980. He was created by Roger Stern and Mike Zeck. He was a fashion mogul who apparently stole designs from other companies and profited off their work. One person who was stiffed by him was Narda Ravana, who became the Belladonna to try and get back at him. Kingsley's first appearances were rather, odd. The character was definitely written to be shady, but he was also depicted as an effeminate, cowardly dandy. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to describe the guy. You could even argue he was a gay stereotype. So, could this guy really be the Hobgoblin? Well, Daniel was meant to account for this. Some of Roderick's more cowardly moments could actually be Daniel masquerading as his brother, since even before being the Hobgoblin, this is something Roderick did. Still, it's definitely a hard sell, and I can see why Tom DeFalco was iffy on the idea. However, I'd say Roger Stern makes it work for the most part. It'd probably be even better if he had the chance to further foreshadow this revelation, which he probably would have if he didn't end up leaving Spider-Man before wrapping the Hobgoblin story up. Some people might question why a fashion designer would be so into becoming the Hobgoblin, but honestly, I think it makes sense once you look at the greater picture. Roderick's first appearance involved him nearly being killed by a supervillain out for revenge. Even if that was Daniel at risk, Roderick himself would still definitely be worried about it. If he could just become a supervillain, then he could protect himself from any other would-be attackers. Also, he could easily use the Hobgoblin to attain even more power. Even in those early issues, Kingsley was established as being a crook, someone who has never had an original idea his entire life. Everything he has, he stole from someone else, which makes sense for a character who stole and modified another villain's equipment rather than coming up with his own. Also, while this isn't intentional, I want you to notice something. What is the first thing the Hobgoblin does when he gets the Green Goblin's gear? He redesigns it. What's he doing on the cover of The Amazing Spider-Man number 238? He's tearing Spider-Man's costume apart! At the end of the day, Roderick Kingsley is the character that makes the most sense to play the role of the Hobgoblin. He has the motives and he has the means. Even if he wasn't quite the ideal candidate, he was certainly the best choice. After all this, where's the Hobgoblin today? Did he recover from this mess? Kinda. The last story featuring him for a long time was Goblins at the Gate, which took place in the pages of the Spectacular Spider-Man. The story ends with him evading capture once again and retiring to the Caribbean. He returned later on, but hasn't done much remarkable outside of Axis Hobgoblin, which, by the by, is absolutely the best thing to feature him in the last 2 decades, and you should go check it out. Even with this saga getting a proper resolution, I think that everything that came before it kind of left a permanent stain on Hobgoblin as a character. Not helping matters is that Norman Osborn is around again, and has been for a long time, so there really isn't a need for a replacement Goblin. That being said, I think there's room for both. If Venom and Carnage can coexist, why can't Green Goblin and Hobgoblin? I think they have enough of their own individual traits to make them distinct enough to serve different roles in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery and the greater Marvel Universe as a whole. The popular perception out there is the Hobgoblin is just a Green Goblin clone, but that's not quite true. To put it simply, Hobgoblin is more practical than his Green counterpart. Osborn has let a grudge consume him, to the point that ending it is the only thing he can think of. There's also his family drama with his son, Harry. Despite their bad relationship, Osborn in some sick way still cares about Harry. Or, he at least cares about the Osborn name. Hobgoblin, on the other hand, remains focused on his main goals, which are obtaining money and power. The thrill that comes with being the Hobgoblin is also a good bonus. He also doesn't have any familial connections. While he did have his brother, Daniel, it's clear that Roderick never saw him as anything more than a pawn, which is just what he sees everyone else as. Also worth noting is that unlike Norman, Roderick has seemingly never had a significant other that he truly loved. Put it plainly, Osborn makes everything personal. To Kingsley, it's all just business. I could probably make a whole video going further in depth with both, while also explaining the differences. Either way, I think writers should use Hobgoblin more, as there's so much untapped potential for him. We hardly know anything about his background, for example. Oh, shit, yeah, I guess you're probably wondering about old Ned Leeds, right? If he wasn't the Hobgoblin, then who was he? Just another one of Hobgoblin's brainwashed stooges, really. Wasn't even given any goblin formula either, hence why he was taken out so easily. Poor guy. With that, I think that wraps this whole thing up. The absolute clusterfuck that is the Hobgoblin's identity crisis is one that has always fascinated me. If you're interested in learning more, check out some of the links in the description for further reading. There's a lot of good stuff out there worth checking out. Before I go, I'd like to thank a couple people. First of all, I'd like to thank all of my subscribers. As of this recording, I have 59 of them, which is kinda crazy to think about. I'd also like to thank my friend, Tastic, for suggesting this video idea to me. I was already thinking about making it, but him pitching the idea is what made me actually want to do it. You can find his YouTube channel in the description. He makes good content. Go check it out. Finally, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. That's right, you, dear viewer. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope you learned something, and I guess that's all I've got to say for now. See you later.